Before there was the Wii, the Kinect, or the Move Motion controller, there was the Power Pad. The Nintendo Power Pad was the first game console of its kind to try something revolutionary, to put your physical activity into the game. Sadly, like most peripherals of the era, it didn't last, but it did inspire some really fun moments and set the stage for future technological innovations. Like most Nintendo properties, the story of the Power Pad starts in Japan, where it was developed by Bandai in the mid 1980s. Bandai is a Japanese toy company and was one of the first third party developers for Nintendo. The pad itself was simple. It was large, measuring a little more than 3 feet by 3 feet when fully opened. The product itself came with two sides, and yes, if you were like me, you probably looked at the A side and scratched your head. On that side were 8 buttons, 6 blue, 2 red, that would be used for some games, but honestly pretty rarely. The far more popular side, the B side, had 12 buttons for 2 players. The operation of the system was simple. Each button had sensors in it that would respond to pressure. How you would specifically use each button depended on the game, but your job was basically to smash each button with your foot. The button pressure roughly, impacted the movement of the character on the screen. The faster you moved, the faster they did. The pad essentially acted as a binary switch. When you put pressure on the appropriate number, the input registered the pressure like your fingers hitting a button press. There was no difference in barely hitting the button or smashing it. When the sensor was depressed, you moved. Of course, if you were anything like me as a kid, you probably did a lot of this. Yeah. The pad itself was crunchy and bulky. You could awkwardly fold it and jam it into a closet somewhere when you weren't playing it. After that, it would inevitably get all folded and crinkly, and you could never smooth it out. When in use, it plugged into the second controller port. You would use the first controller port to select games. The first time that the Power Pad hit the market was 1986. I keep saying Power Pad, but upon its Japanese release, the product was known as the Family Trainer. The first game was also created by Bandai, Stadium Events. That game, which came with 1 or 2 player options, allowed players to compete in 4 different sports: the 100-meter dash, the 110-meter hurdles, a long jump, and a triple jump. Most popular was the 100-meter dash, since that was basically a straight question of how quick you could run in place. The game also came with 2 extra modes. There was the tournament mode, which allowed player 1 to play against the computer. There was also an Olympics mode, in which you could play all events. I don't know what you remember, but the fouls in the games, which would eventually disqualify you, drove me nuts as a kid. You could get a foul for false starts, timing out if you didn't finish a race fast enough, jumping and not landing, etc. I get that it was designed to make the game more realistic, but if you were a kid and didn't know what you were doing, let's just say the power button was pushed to end the game more times than I care to think about. The Family Trainer was relatively close to the first of its kind, a video game that encouraged exercise. To be clear, this wasn't anything like a sustained exercise program, but it did at least get players up and moving. The only thing that came close to it was the Joyboard of 1982, a balance peripheral that might be the worst named product I've ever heard of. It was used for Atari. Lesser known was the Foot Craze, a 1986 Atari peripheral that operated on the same basic idea as a Family Trainer. 2 games were released for Foot Craze, Video Reflex and Video Jogger. Neither sold well, and the peripheral basically faded into oblivion. The Family Trainer made its North American debut in 1987, then went to Europe in 1988. At the time of its premiere in these markets, the product was renamed as Family Fun Fitness, probably a way to emphasize that the product was for fun, not just athletic training. Nintendo obviously saw promise in this third-party accessory. How do I know this? Well, in 1988, it purchased the rights for the accessory from Bandai, but in North America only. From there, it recalled all versions of the Family Fun Fitness and rebranded the product as what most of us know it, the Power Pad. This recall would have some interesting impacts on the value of some of its games and products. More on that shortly. Upon its rebranding, the Power Pad was sold with World Class Track Meet, which was basically a rebranded version of Stadium Events. World Class Track Meet was the most popular and most well-known game for the Power Pad thanks to its pack-in status. One interesting side note about the rebranding: it didn't happen right away. In fact, an unknown number of copies of Stadium Events are sold in America. Estimates hold that there are merely hundreds of copies of the game still surviving, making it one of the most expensive games available today. A 2017 copy of the game sold for $41,977. Regardless, Bandai retained development rights for the product in Japan, and it continued to market it under its original name, Family Trainer. It also continued to produce games. World Class Track Meet was not even close to the only game that the Power Pad used. In fact, there are 11 others out there, although 6 were North American publications only, while all but 1 game were made available in Japan. The first game released for the system wasn't even World Class Track Meet. It was actually Athletic World. Like World Class Track Meet, players would simulate different games, including hurdles, hop-a-log, and rafting. One interesting note about this game, it asks for your age and gender and then alters the advice it gives based on what you input. I don't want to think about how gender impacted the advice, to be honest. The third North American PowerPad game was Dance Aerobics, another relatively well-known game. Your job here is to follow the movements of your dance instructor, who will dance to one of 8 routines. Your score goes up or down based on how well you can mimic her movements, which are counted off as the game plays. If the game looked familiar, it should. Dance Aerobics is one of the first, if not the first, dance rhythm game. We'll come back to that later too. The fourth game released in North America was Street Cop, which saw its premiere in Japan as Manhattan Cop. And I gotta tell you, this one sounds awesome, and I'm sorry I didn't play it. You are the aforementioned street cop, chasing criminals and jumping over obstacles. Get close enough to the criminals, smack them with your club, or run through them. This was about as violent as Nintendo got in the late 80s, and that's kind of amazing. Game number 5 was Super Team Games, and stop me if you've heard this one before. The PowerPad gets used for athletic competitions. This one is basically a summer camp-like series of games. You work your way through obstacle courses or participate in a skateboard race, using the PowerPad to run, swim, or climb. The final game was Short Order/Explode. It was released by Nintendo in 1989, and the only game to be released only in America and not to be released by Bandai. This was basically 2 games in one. In short order, you put together a hamburger per the request of customers, stepping on the corresponding correct ingredients. In Explode, okay, just bear with me here. There are 12 hens. A dog has put a bomb under the hens who are laying eggs. You have to step on the corresponding number to defuse the bomb. I mean, really, who hasn't done that at some point in their life? I defused bombs just the other day. Sadly, Short Order and Explode was the last game produced for the PowerPad. What's interesting is that sales stopped despite the fact that the accessory was a hit. It actually sold 500,000 copies in North America. Just because the accessory stopped being made doesn't mean that its influence went away. About 20 years after the PowerPad was released, the Wii, the system that caused such a sensation by incorporating physical activity and movement, released the Mat controller. This controller worked with 3 games: Active Life Outdoor Challenge, Active Life Extreme Challenge, and Active Life Explorer, which came out in 2007, 2008, and 2010. This mat was compatible for the Wii and plugged into the game controller ports. Interestingly, these games worked in conjunction with the Wiimote, meaning that another player could play the game without using the mat controller. These games were more or less a series of minigames, and required the player holding the controller and operating the mat to work in conjunction with each other. You could jump a log, stomp on moles, or race kayaks. Honestly, it seems like a perfect use for the system, and a much more natural evolution for the PowerPad. Of course, the impact that the mat controller had on the video game world pales in comparison to the impact of DDR. DDR, or Dance Dance Revolution, is the world-renowned rhythm game. It first premiered in Japan in 1998 and spread across the world. The object is to connect with the arrows on the dance platform in line with the song and as designated by what you see on the screen. Multiple versions, including home console versions, would appear, and the game is still being released today, with the most recent version coming out in June 2024. As you can see, the PowerPad and DDR dance platform look pretty familiar. It doesn't take a genius or any great insight to note that the DDR dance platform can draw its lineage directly from the PowerPad. What I'd argue is more interesting is all of the versions of physical controllers in between. Indeed, between the PowerPad and DDR, there were a lot of attempts to make you the controller, or engage the player in some form of combined exercise and gaming. That includes the Sega Activator, which was this weird octagon that supposedly moved when you did, and the Aura Interactor, which vibrated when you were punched or kicked in a fighting game. The goal of these controllers was clear: make you part of the game. I think it's safe to say that the PowerPad had the largest impact of controllers that required more than just finger movements, at least during the 1980s and early 1990s. Broadly speaking, the PowerPad had a major impact on video games, in that it incorporated physical activity into gaming, something that had never been done before, and certainly never been done at a level of commercial success that Nintendo managed to achieve. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to try to fold up my PowerPad without crinkling it. Wish me luck. Did you have the PowerPad, or do you still? Any fond memories you want to share? Let us know in the comments below, and if you made it to this part of the video, please check out what else the YouTube algorithm is serving up for you, or click on the page to subscribe. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you liked watching this video as much as I liked making it. Take care, folks.